So at a recent UN meeting, Egypt stepped up and delivered this incredibly stark warning about the crisis happening in Sudan. And this wasn't just some routine regional update, no. This was a full-blown declaration of concern for global security. Let's break down what they said and why it really matters to all of us.
This quote right here, it gets straight to the heart of it. Right from the get-go, the Egyptian representative wasn't framing this as some distant civil war. They made it crystal clear. This is a direct threat to global stability. The big takeaway is simple. What happens in Sudan does not stay in Sudan.
All right, so to really get a handle on Egypt's position, we're going to look at 5 key areas. First, we'll unpack the global consequences. Then we'll get into what Egypt calls its non-negotiable red lines. From there, we'll look at their proposed path to peace, check out the humanitarian aid that's already happening, and then wrap it up with their powerful plea for everyone to get on the same page.
Okay, first up, why is this crisis so dangerous? Well, the argument made at the UN is that the fighting in Sudan doesn't just stay inside its own borders. It's actually creating these dangerous ripple effects that are spreading out far and wide.
And we're not talking about vague threats here. These are incredibly specific. You've got the conflict threatening the Red Sea, which is one of the world's most critical shipping lanes. It also creates a vacuum that's basically a breeding ground for terrorism and organized crime. And what does that do? Well, it fuels illegal migration and the trafficking of both weapons and people, which threatens to destabilize the entire Horn of Africa. It's a chain reaction.
And beyond all the big geopolitical threats, there's a huge human cost. Egypt specifically called out what it sees as blatant violations of international law, pointing to terrible crimes being committed against innocent people, especially in the regions of Darfur and Kordofan.
So, with all that danger on the table, what exactly is Egypt's official position? Well, this brings us to the concept of red lines. These are the non-negotiable boundaries that, if they get crossed, could trigger a much more direct response.
And just so we're all on the same page, a red line in the world of diplomacy is a hard limit. It's a country's way of saying, look, do not cross this boundary, because if you do, the consequences are going to be severe. It basically signals that certain things are absolutely off the table.
And this brings us to Egypt's #1 priority, their biggest red line of all. The message could not be clearer. Sudan must remain a single, unified, and sovereign nation. Any attempt to break the country apart is the ultimate line in the sand. And this main principle is backed up by several others. Egypt has stated, flat out, that they reject any move to partition the country, they're giving their full support to Sudan's national institutions, and they refuse to recognize any kind of rival governments. It all boils down to one fundamental belief. Egypt's own national security is directly tied to Sudan's stability.
Okay, so with those red lines clearly drawn, the focus shifts to a solution. Egypt isn't just standing there warning about the problem, they're actively pushing a diplomatic framework to try and end this whole thing peacefully.
And the path they're proposing is a really clear 3-step process. First, get a comprehensive humanitarian truce in place. Second, set up safe corridors for aid to get in and for civilians to get out. And finally, and this is the really crucial part, launch a political process that includes everyone, and most importantly, is led by the Sudanese people themselves.
And they're not trying to do this alone, not at all. Egypt really emphasized that it's an active partner in the international efforts, working right alongside major players like the United Nations and the African Union to create a unified front for peace.
But diplomacy and words are one thing, and action is something else entirely. The next part of the address was all about the real, tangible, on-the-ground support that Egypt is providing to the Sudanese people right now.
This number, wow, it's just staggering. Since this crisis blew up, Egypt has opened its borders and welcomed hundreds of thousands of Sudanese citizens, giving them a safe place to go in what they call their second home. That single statistic really just highlights the massive human scale of all this.
And the support goes deep inside Sudan itself. Egypt is sending urgent relief aid, and we're not just talking food and supplies. They're sending tons of vital medical equipment and medicines. They've even deployed an expert medical convoy with top doctors to perform surgeries, all while they continue to support essential infrastructure projects just to keep the country running. So this brings us to the final and maybe the most important message that was delivered to the UN Security Council. It was a direct appeal to the entire international community about how it should be approaching this crisis. The representative basically laid out 2 very clear paths. The wrong path is to let Sudan become an arena for international competition and rivalry. The right path, the one Egypt is calling for, is a complete shift toward cooperation, coordination, and transparency. It's a plea to work together, not against each other.
This quote just perfectly captures that appeal. It's a direct challenge to global powers to put their own interests aside and work together with real sincerity and transparency to help the Sudanese people. At the end of the day, the message is simple but powerful. Choose unity over rivalry.
And that leaves us all with this final critical question. The crisis in Sudan is a clear and present danger, not just to the region, but to the whole world. And Egypt's message at the UN really forces us to ask, in a world that feels more and more divided, can a shared catastrophic threat like this be the one thing that finally gets everyone to act as one? It's a question really worth thinking about.